Hey guys, it's Libby, and I just finished A Darker Shade of Magic, and now I have to talk about it. If you have been following me on Goodreads or Twitter, you will know that I did not particularly care for this. In fact, I made notes for this video. I never make notes. There was so much horribleness that I needed to be sure to talk about. But before we get into all the ranting and raving, I would like to give an unbiased plot synopsis. I feel that I owe that to this book. So, once upon a time, there were 4 parallel Londons, all sort of stacked up against each other in space-time. And though the worlds beyond them were all different, London remained the same. And throughout these 4 Londons flowed 2 forces, that of magic and that of humanity. And for a while, they were in balance, and all was good. But then the balance began to shift. In Grey London, it shifted in favor of humanity. Magic became all but forgotten, and humanity took over. On the other end of the spectrum, in Black London, magic took over mankind and corrupted them. And then Red and White London sat in the middle of this continuum. Red London was able to thrive, but only because they used White London as a barrier between them and the corrupted magic of Black London. Enter Kell. He is a resident of Red London and is attached to the royal family there. And he is one of only 2 known remaining Antari, people who have very strong magic in them, who can use their blood to create portals between the Londons. And so his job is to be a messenger between the thrones of Grey, Red, and White London. We don't talk about Black London. And then I have to allow a bit of my bias to start creeping in. The plot is based around basically the Ring of Power from Lord of the Rings. You have a small, nondescript item that is full of powerful but evil magic, and to see it is to want to possess it, and it wants to go home to Sauron. And then there's like court intrigue and great magical battles and stuff. So that's the story. What were my problems with it? Allow me to tell you. So first thing is that the first 170 pages of this 400-page book are spent on world building. Now, this is understandable because this is the first book in a trilogy, and we kind of have 3 different worlds that we have to establish as well as a magic system. So I get it. But then after we get through all of this and sort of slowly learn how all this stuff works, on page 190, we then just get an info dump that tells us all of the stuff we had learned in the first almost 200 pages in like 1 page, really succinctly and pretty nicely. So why couldn't we just trim down a whole bunch of the beginning? And when you have a lot of world building to do, the thing that's going to carry the reader through is interesting protagonists. And Kell is the least interesting protagonist that I have ever read. The man is a piece of cardboard. I thought long and hard about what a possible character trait or personality description I could give of him, and all I've got is doesn't like it when bad things happen. And it's not like it would have been that hard to do. There's times when Kell wakes up from a coma and he imagines that his brother is banging on the door, and I'm like, tell me how you feel about that, Kell. Are you frustrated because you're tired of his antics? Do you feel guilty for having slept in? I don't know, something. And unfortunately, the world building still doesn't really do its job because I don't really believe this. And I do feel a little bit bad for A Darker Shade of Magic because I read it immediately after finishing The Crimson Petal and the White, which is also set in London, just regular London, not multiple magical Londons. And this is like one of the greatest books ever written, so stiff competition here. But when characters are described walking down the streets in Crimson Petal, I can like see in my mind movie all of the various sorts of people bustling along the streets with them. In this book, the streets are empty in my mind, and like only when someone actually interacts with a character am I like, oh right, more people. So like at one point, Kel goes into the throne room of the Queen of White London where she is sitting. Also, I find it amusing that the Queen just sort of sits in the throne room waiting for the plot to happen to her. And in my mind, it's just them in a giant empty white room, because I am never given any reason to believe otherwise. And then it says a servant walked over from the corner, and I was like, oh, now there's a bunch of people in here, or maybe just that one? I don't know. Moving on to our other characters, the other mainest one is Lila Bard, who lives in Grey London and makes her living as a pickpocket. Her main characteristic is thinking other women are stupid, which I didn't love. They're all like flirting and wearing dresses. Well, la-di-da. I'm so sorry, Lila, that the social order of early 19th century London demanded that women get married if they wanted to, like, have a house to live in. I don't think this is fair. So she's a fairly generic, slightly kick-ass heroine. But then, of course, and I hate the fact that I have to say of course, it turns out that she is the specialist of the snowflakes. And excuse me while I go vomit. Then, side characters. Let me just say that if you are a lower middle class man in either Grey or Red London, your days are numbered, because there were several of these guys who showed up for a couple of chapters and then they died horribly. Every single one. Life's tough. And we also have Rye, who is the Prince of Red London and Kel's like foster brother, adoptive brother. And he seems like the sort of character that you could like even if you don't like the book. He's sort of affable type of dude, but that was the only part of the book that like offended me. Most of this book made me bored, but Rye made me mad because his main character trait is that he likes sex. That is not a problem. The problem is that we know this because he is bisexual. As a bisexual, I hate having to tell people about my sexual orientation and then say, but like I don't want to have sex with you. It's fine. I don't want to have sex with everybody. Just a very short list of people. It's really a short list. And I don't think that it is helpful to have bisexual characters just like want to have sex with everybody. Then we have our villains of the piece, who are the twin brother and sister, Athos. I'm gonna say whichever one comes out. And Astrid, and they are the King and Queen of White London. And they are cartoons. Their skin and their hair is pure white. They drink blood, not because they're vampires, but just for fun. They say things like, "Hello, flower boy." Athos, at least, and probably also Astrid, is literally a sadist. He says he never relished war. He saw bloodshed and battle as means to an end, a destination, but I have always relished the journey, and I promise you, I'm going to savor this. And they're maybe incestuous. This is never, like, directly hinted at, but sometimes they do something and I'm like, that was intimate. And I do not object to having incestuous characters in books. I do object to having incestuous characters in books if you're just being lazy and want people to not like them. So, can't take them seriously, which I guess means that our villain is Holland, which I'm uncomfortable with. So Holland is the other Antari, and he is affiliated with the White Throne, which is not super fun. So at the beginning, you don't really know what's going on with Holland. He's He's literally an international man of mystery. And then you find out that he's basically like a mind slave to the Danes, and the Danes can do like the evil magic where they control your mind, and they can do this to varying levels. So some people just become like robots who only move when they tell them to move. Holland has a bit more autonomy, but not that much more. They can get him to do really horrible things to himself. So when he's doing really horrible things to other people, it's hard for me to tell if that's him acting or if that's just the Danes acting. Also, he's maybe a rape victim. Like the incest thing, it's a little bit murky, but Athos is just a creepy dude. And you'll excuse me if I have a really tough time rooting against the rape victim. But then after we learn this, he becomes like the main bad guy for most of the book. And then at the end, we're back to like, oh, poor man. Maybe he was good deep inside. God. What am I supposed to think? What am I supposed to think? I'm supposed to think that I don't like this book, clearly. And then one final complaint. Kel and Lila get over traumatic things remarkably quickly. They're like, terrible thing just happened, but I got witty banter. Like at one point, Kel shows up in the middle of when Lila's fighting off a bunch of people, and she's like, what took you so long? And he's like, I got held up. He got held up killing a man, and he feels really bad about it. And Lila, fairly early in the book, her landlord attempts to rape her, and then she murders him. And this is then never brought up again. I feel like that would make an impression on you. And that's the only reason that you would include that scene, so that you could have it come up later, because the opening sequence for Lila is pretty unnecessary. She doesn't have to start at the boat and then go to the inn. She could just start at the inn and it would be fine. So, to sum up, I did not like this book because most of the characters were problematic for the reasons I have just described. And you know, this makes me sad because I think this was a really interesting concept for a book. And the actual prose was perfectly decent. There was one thing that I liked though, and that was the languages that Victoria Schwab made up. So as would make sense, these divergent Londons have divergent languages. In Grey London, which is our world, they speak English, and in Red London, they speak Arnesian, which was kind of like generic Indo-European. It seemed like Latin German to me, with maybe a little bit of Turkish. And this makes sense because in the Red world, England doesn't exist, Arnesia exists, and its capital is London, and it has sort of taken over most of Europe. And then in White London, the language has lots of, you know, umlauts, because it's got that Scandinavian influence from the Danes, and I thought that was well thought out, and it worked well. If only the rest of the book had. Okay, I think it's time to stop. I'm sorry if you really liked this book and I just tore it apart. I gave it 2 stars. I did not give it 1 star. It could have been way worse. Could have been way worse. I never felt the urge to throw it across the room as I did with The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. That book is just crap.